Apple, the world's first trillion-dollar tech company and soon to be the world's first $4 trillion company, a luxury technology brand, and every entrepreneur's biggest lesson. Today, we are not going to look at Apple's financial results, nor its marketing and design strategies, or how it may be Steve Wozniak's biggest regret. I don't think it is. But today, we are looking at the company's environmental pledge. Is it legit, or is it just corporate buzzword? So sit tight and enjoy the show. Oops, excuse me. Wrong track. Alright, that's better. Let's roll. Apple are saying that they're aiming for net zero carbon footprint by 2030. A big claim and sounds fancy, right? Although it does, but what does it actually mean? Net zero is a big word that companies all over the place are talking about. Companies of all sizes speak about net zero commitments, carbon neutrality, going net zero by 2030 or 2050 or whatever year. These pledges that are all over the place from government entities as well as companies alike. But the question is, what is net zero and what does it mean? Well, net zero doesn't mean that Apple will stop emitting carbon altogether. That would be like saying, I'm going on a diet while holding a donut. And the donut being that Apple is basically producing iPhones in factories and emitting all these toxic chemicals outside of said factory. So while holding a donut and saying I'm on a diet doesn't make any sense. So does saying that I'm going net zero while running your factory. So what does it mean exactly? In Apple's case, net zero here means that they'll balance out the emissions that they create by neutralizing an equal amount of carbon in the atmosphere. What that means in practice is that they're going to do things to balance out the emissions that they produce from making the iPhone and other Apple devices. And if we go back to our diet analogy, it's like saying I'm going to eat all the donuts that I could eat as long as I run on the treadmill to burn off all the calories that I put on from eating said donuts. So Apple is saying we're going to keep producing as many iPhones as we could as long as we plant enough trees, for example. Now the question is, how does this work exactly? We hear about Apple saying that our iPhones are made from recycled aluminum, and we think that this is actually good. However, not everything that we hear from companies is always genuine. When company harms nature, like for example, cut trees down or displace wildlife or create a giant pile of e-waste, it needs to compensate for that damage. One way that Apple does so is that it takes that e-waste and turns it into new iPhones and claims that it is made from recycled aluminum, for example. In general, there are some methods that companies use to reach net zero or carbon neutrality. The first one is reforestation, the second is carbon capture technologies, and the third is carbon credit. Reforestation is planting trees to absorb CO2, basically undoing the destruction of trees caused by those cardboard iPhone boxes, for example. The second method is carbon capture. The emissions that are produced by factories are entrapped into specialized compartments that are then stored for long term. Basically, we are removing carbon and storing it inside, for example, a warehouse instead of just eliminating it altogether by not producing more. The third method is carbon credits, which is basically paying someone else to do the eco-friendly stuff for you. Carbon credits are a bit interesting. It's basically a permit that allows companies to emit as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as they wish, as long as they pay for it. Now, when they pay for it, this means that the money that they pay is going to be used to remove carbon from the atmosphere by other entities. The mechanism itself is more nuanced than that, but the idea is that companies are going to be given a set number of credits of carbon that they could emit into the atmosphere by the United Nations. And if they exceed that, they have to buy the credits. And it's basically a market for carbon. So how much carbon can I produce is determined by how many credits I have purchased or was allocated by the United Nations. And this is done on a national level, so for each nation. And the governments sell that to the companies, and companies then later produce as many emissions that they want as long as they pay for it. And if they don't, well, something bad happens, I guess. Now, the question is, was it important to understand what net zero is? And the simple answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't have talked about it. It brings us into another segment, which is the greenwashing problem. Greenwashing is a term that sounds innocent, but in fact, it's not. Greenwashing is when companies exaggerate or outright lie about their eco-friendly efforts. Think of it as the corporate version of saying, I ran a marathon, when you really walked half a block to get a latte. That doesn't sound very genuine, does it? Our big question is Apple guilty of greenwashing, or are they genuinely trying to save the planet? Let's take a look at what they are doing exactly to determine the answer. So their claim that by 2030, every device that they sell will have no climate impact. That is a very bold statement. So let's break it down and see where its elements lie. First, Apple claims that they're going to use renewable energy and that they are transitioning all their facilities to run on 100% renewable energy. In fact, some of their data centers already do. Impressive. But remember, it's easier to fix your own house than your neighbor. Another thing that Apple is doing is pushing their suppliers to adopt greener practices, from using recycled materials to reducing waste. Again, points for effort, but let's not forget that they're working with hundreds of suppliers. Not all of them are thrilled about the extra homework, and the future is not that clear in regards to all the suppliers adhering to Apple's standards. Now, from design perspective, Apple's products are made from recycled material. Are they really made to last? For example, the iPhone and the MacBook do not have replaceable batteries. Changing the screen now became easier, but it's still an expensive procedure. And Apple Care only lasts for 2 years with no capabilities for extension. And let us not forget about software updates that year after year drop device support for older generation iPhones or whatever Apple product. There is also the matter of the battery. Batteries are made with a limited supply, and Apple haven't made any efforts to increase the capacity itself as well as the efficiency as they did. Therefore, iPhone batteries do not last long enough, and Apple has been reducing the older iPhones' speed to compensate for battery loss over time. Now, these practices may seem to be pro-shareholder, but they are not pro-consumer, nor pro-environment, because people will have to buy the iPhone every 2 years, for example, or every year, or every 4 years. And we get that Apple is a company that is looking, publicly traded company that is looking to appease the shareholders and do good for the environment at the same time. But doing so does take from their credibility and reduces the credibility of their claims regarding the environmental efforts that they are pursuing. Now, Apple, like many other companies, rely on carbon credits to hit their carbon-related targets. They do not, for example, plant trees or do something for the environment directly outside of their own premises. As we've learned, carbon credits give companies the get-go to pollute as much as they want as long as they pay. We live in a capitalistic world, so this makes sense from Apple's perspective. What they do is that they offset the damage by funding green projects elsewhere. It sounds good in theory, but in practice, it's like spilling coffee in your friend's carpet and sending them a gift card for cleaning supplies. It's not very involved, we could say. However, to Apple's credit, pun not intended, they are doing more than most companies. Their investments in renewable energy and sustainable materials are real, and they've set a high bar for competitors. But does that make them eco-saviors? Not quite. Apple still produces millions of devices every year, encouraging an endless upgrade cycle that feeds consumerism. Yes, they're reducing the environmental impact of those devices, but the demand they create cannot be ignored. It's kind of ingenuine when you are creating millions of devices and encouraging people to buy them and then say that you are pledging to the environment. It is hard for us to justify Apple's claims when they are not doing more for the consumer as much as they're doing for the shareholder. And now that they are at the brink of breaking 4 trillion market cap, it means that Apple is actually being more shareholder focused than environmentally focused. But does that mean that the trend is going to shift the closer that we get to 2030? As we saw with Apple's changing their practices slowly from, finally allowing us to use a USB-C instead of a lightning cable, or them allowing individuals to change their screens more easily and with less hassles, and opening up their software. When we take all these facts into account, the answer about Apple's greenwashing us or actually being genuinely interested in saving the planet becomes more complicated. Apple's pledge has substance. Let's be real. Apple is a genuine company that is making a genuine effort towards the environment. After all, they removed the stickers, the plastic stickers from their boxes. They removed the charger, for God's sake, people. They are making real effort to reduce plastic in the environment. And they encouraged us to not consume more blocks to charge our iPhones because they assume that we already have them at home, so why put them in the box? That is a genuine effort. However, the use of carbon credits is not entirely convincing, and the relentless push for new product sales show they are not entirely walking the eco talk, at least for now. Now, that being said, Apple's environmental efforts are a step in the right direction. But let us not get carried away. Being a responsible consumer means holding them accountable and asking the tough questions. So the next time you see an Apple ad talking about saving the planet, remember, it is not just about what they are doing, it is also about why they're doing it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check if my iPhone is due for an upgrade. For the environment, of course. Jokes aside, let us know what do you think about Apple's commitment to the environment. Do you think they are genuinely trying to change all while being pro-shareholder instead of pro-consumer? Or are they just riding the wave just as they rode the AI wave without any substantial contribution?